Hello there.
We need some milk.
What is that?
Why you bullying me?
Nope. 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 Nope.
I'm dying. Help me.
Hey, yo!
Who's this woman with a lightsaber?
Playstyle will come.
Liar!
I'm a Jedi.
Droid, go! Shut now!
Oh shit. Here we go again. Another happy landing.
Oh my God!
Yeah. This is big brain time.
Let's do this.
Get him, Droid.
Hey, hey, chill, chill.
This is gonna be easy.
You picked the wrong house, fool.
Oh, I don't think so.
Nope.
What? How can you do this? This is outrageous. It's unfair.
We weren't expecting special forces. That's the point, Sergeant.
What is up, guys? So today for this video we're going to be taking a look at Iden Versio, leader of the Inferno Squad. So today we're going to be taking a look at Iden Versio, like I mentioned, and we're going to be going over some of her star cards. We're going to be talking about her strengths and her weaknesses. Also, I'm going to be showcasing some gameplay in Heroes vs Villains alongside Galactic Assault in the hope of hopefully trying to help you guys out in regards to how to play Iden, as I find Iden to be one of those characters that is really annoying when you're going up against her, especially because most players now who are veterans of Battlefront 2, they all know about Iden's secondary fire, which is absolutely ridiculous. And also one of Iden's strongest abilities in a kit is also her stun droid. Stun droid is very, very annoying, and it is very effective as well when you're going up against saber wielders or even blaster characters as well, because it actually can help you out when you're actually going up against these type of enemies. So like I mentioned, we're going to be jumping in. I'm going to be talking about the star cards, also showcasing the ones that I use, and I'm going to be explaining why I use these specific star cards compared to all the other star cards that she has, so that I can try to give my verdict on why I think these star cards are more beneficial for Iden, especially for newer players as well who are coming to the game, picking up Iden and trying to see, like, you know, what star cards they can actually play for. Iden, like I mentioned, she's a fun character and she has her strengths and she has her weaknesses just like every other character in this game. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight in. I'm going to talk about the star cards and I'm going to get into some gameplay for you guys. So jumping straight in, we're going to take a look at Iden's star cards right now. And you guys can see the star cards I use for Iden compared to the other ones that she has. And I'm going to be explaining why I use these three specific star cards compared to the other ones that she has in her kit, as I try to maximize Iden's blaster and also her stun droid to their full potential. I find these two things, they work very well with each other, especially when you're going up against saber characters who are just blocking your shots and deflecting them back at you. When you use a secondary fire, it is very effective against these saber wielders, and also it can be very good against blaster heroes as well. So I'm going to be explaining the star cards uses right now for you guys as well. So So the first star card that I use is called Alternative Methods. And the reason why I use this star card is because it actually allows Iden's TL50, which is our blaster, to have a 25% increased frequency. Now what this means is that her secondary fire, which you guys already know about, especially veteran players, blue balls, they just go across the map like crazy whenever you shoot it. This actually allows Iden to shoot these blue balls or secondary fire much faster. And this is actually really effective and really beneficial to her, because most times, let's just say you're going up against a saber wield as an example, they're just blocking all of your normal blaster hits and you just want to get rid of them as fast as possible. Now because you have the star card equipped, you're actually going to be able to use your secondary fire at a much faster speed. This is actually really effective because when you actually use Iden's normal blaster, which you know her TL50, you can shoot a couple of rounds with it, do some damage to your opponents, and then let's just say that your opponent is on the brink of death, but they're just deflecting all of your shots back, then you're able to actually use your secondary fire. And this is actually really helpful in a lot of situations, because if you use your secondary fire, like I mentioned, it does splash damage. Now if there are enemies within the range of when you use her secondary fire, they are going to be damaged by her secondary fire. Iden's secondary fire, it's very annoying. A lot of players, especially who've been playing Battlefront for a very long time, they all know about the secondary fire. It's very annoying to go up against, but if you are the one playing Iden, it's very fun to actually use this ability on her blaster and actually defeat enemies with it, because in most scenarios, let's just say a bunch of enemies are all clustered up together, this is perfect for using your secondary fire. And this star card, like I mentioned, it is very beneficial if you are a type of player that wants to be able to actually shoot these secondary fire blaster balls at your opponent at a much faster rate. Second star card that I use is called Cool Blaster. And the benefits of the star card is it actually allows Iden's TL50 to be fired for a much longer duration of time. And what this actually means is that this star card actually allows Iden's TL50 to have a 15% decrease in when it's actually going to be overheated. Now in most scenarios, this is actually really beneficial, because let's just say you're going up against a group of enemies, or let's just say you're going up against a single target. Their blaster is overheated because they have fired as much rounds as they possibly could, but because you have the star card equipped, you'll actually be able to fire your blaster off for a much longer duration of time. And this is actually really beneficial, because if you're going up against opponents like I mentioned, and you just keep firing off your blaster and everything like that, you'll be able to actually do damage to them. That's one. And you'll also be able to most likely defeat other enemies who are in range of you as well, because you'll be able to actually have a decrease in when your blaster is going to be overheated. Like I mentioned, this is actually really beneficial, because let's just say you're going up against another blaster character as an example. Both of you guys are shooting at each other. In most scenarios, you're going to want to be able to defeat your opponent as fast as possible, and you're going to want to be able to make sure that you can actually whether decide you're going to focus your shots on another opponent who may be next to you, or you're just going to want to just go on and maybe use a secondary fire after all. So like I mentioned, this star card, nothing much to it. It is just very beneficial because it just allows Iden to shoot her TL50 blaster for a longer period of time. And this is actually really beneficial as well when you pair it up with a secondary fire, because let's just say you're using your normal TL50 bolts, and then you'll actually be able to have some blaster heat so that you can actually use your secondary fire. And this is actually really good, like I mentioned. And finally, the last star card I use is called Droid Batteries. Benefits of this star card is it actually allows Iden Stun Droid and also her Droid Shield to have a 25% recharge cooldown time. This is actually really helpful, because in most scenarios, as everyone already knows, especially when you're playing Iden, especially veteran players, Iden's Stun Droid is probably the most annoying thing to go up against. But if you're the one playing as Iden, it's actually one of the most life-saving things in her kit. This ability is very good in regards to making sure that you can actually stun lock your opponents and you can do ridiculous damage to them, whether you want to shoot them with the normal TL50 blaster or you want to follow up with your secondary fire blaster bolts. So it all depends on what the scenario is and how you want to go about doing this. Like I mentioned, this star card, I find the star card to be one of Iden's staple star cards, Droid Batteries, because the Droid Shield, as an example, is very helpful and I'd say is situationally useful. Most scenarios, as I said, you're taking a lot of damage from your opponent and you're in a very sticky situation, you can pop the Droid Shield and then you won't be able to take damage as long as the cooldown for this is actually still activated, and then you can then reposition yourself for whatever you want to go after and do afterwards. And then let's just say the Droid Shield, you can then follow up with then going into using your shock droid. And like I mentioned, the shock droid, it is ridiculous. A lot of times you'll be able to actually take a full blaster hero down from full health to near death in more scenarios. As an example, let's just say you're going up against Master Yoda. Master Yoda is blocking, he's being annoying, he's just deflecting all of your, he's just absorbing all of your blaster bolts. Let's just say that you're able to get the shock off with this. Now Yoda is stunned, and then also I'd highly recommend whenever you're playing Iden as well, always try to land those headshots, because obviously headshots do the most damage to your opponents. So you stun your opponent, and then you'll be able to actually just rain all fire on them, literally, and be able to just do ridiculous damage to them as well. So that's why I use the Stalker, and why I think it's actually very beneficial in actually playing Iden, because in more scenarios, especially when you're playing larger game modes like Galactic Assault or even Supremacy as an example, you're going to want your stun droid up as much as possible, because in the last situation, especially when you're trying to get for kill streaks and stuff like that, enemies are always going to be targeting you. For one, you're playing as Iden being a blaster character, Iden is a target no matter what. Most saber wielders, whenever they see Iden, they will immediately run after Iden, because they know that she is very annoying, and they also know that one stun and that's it. Especially if you stun an opponent, then all of your teammates can then fire upon them, and obviously that's not going to be good for your opponent. So in most scenarios, like I mentioned, having this star card equipped and also running as well is very, very helpful, because it just means that you'll be able to have your stun droid up as often as you possibly could, really. So you know, it comes back much faster, which means that you're able to use it much easier and also much faster as well. And also having the droid shield as well coming back at a faster recharge rate is actually pretty helpful as well, I'd mention. So now that we've explained the star cards of Iden, so I'm just going to be sharing some tips and tricks as well for you guys, especially when you're playing as Iden. Iden, let's talk about her abilities firstly. So I've already mentioned her stun droid, one of the most annoying things to deal with, especially when you are on the receiving end of it, because one stun, and in more scenarios, especially if you can land those headshots followed up with some secondary fire hits, you'll be able to melt your opponents ridiculously quick. Iden is no joke. So her stun droid, very helpful. Like I mentioned, it's probably one of the best abilities in Iden kit, because it just means that you can actually stun your opponent. And what this actually does as well is that when you actually stun an opponent, if there are enemies within the range of it, they also get stunned as well. This is actually really helpful, because if you're in a game with like Galactic Assault as an example, then the person that you've stunned and also the people who are within the range of it, they are also stunned as well, which means that you can then have an opportunity to then follow up and actually defeat them, or your opponents can just take them out while they're in that stun animation, which is actually really helpful. So I'd highly recommend whenever you're using the stun droid, I'd say save it for opportunities that you see fit. Don't just use it on like one person. I'd always recommend using it when there's maybe multiple persons, or if it's one person, then maybe a saber wielder or a blaster hero as an example, because they're more tanky and they are going to be able to do more damage to you. So you're going to want to make sure that you actually stun them, so that you can actually do as much damage to them as possible. And in most scenarios, if you stun them and you just unable to kill them, most scenarios is that their life is going to be ridiculously low, because you've stunned them so much and done really good damage to them that they're going to want to retreat. And then in most scenarios, you'll be able to actually then follow with a couple of hits of the secondary fire. Another tip as well is when you're playing as Iden, you can actually shoot with her TL50 blaster normally. Just hold R2 as the right trigger and you can actually fire. And what you actually can do as well is also you can use L2 at the same time while you're using R2, which is just to shoot normally, and this is going to put you in an animation where you're going to shoot your normal TL50 blaster bolts, and then you're going to actually go into your secondary fire straight away. And it kind of like bypasses this whole like animation where you're just going to load up the pulse cannon. And this is actually really helpful in a lot of scenarios, because let's just say you're going up against a bunch of enemies, or let's just say a saber wielder as an example. They're deflecting your shots back at you, but you can actually shoot them. So one, when you shoot them, you're going to be draining their stamina, and then you can then press L2, which is then going to actually initiate the secondary fire animation. And this is actually really beneficial in throwing your opponents off guard, because they're just going to expect you to just keep shooting at you, while you can actually then use your secondary fire, and it's actually going to help you out in more scenarios as well. Iden's pulse cannon, her middle ability, I'd say this is like situationally useful. In most scenarios, whenever it is like fully charged, or I'd say maybe 75% or 65% charged, especially if you are very good at aiming, you can actually land those headshots, and then you'll be able to actually see that you'll be able to defeat your enemies, which is actually really good. Her pulse cannon, it does splash damage, and this is actually really helpful, especially let's just say you're going up against a saber wielder who's just blocking. Then you can actually use the pulse cannon, especially if you are at a very good range away from them, and then you can actually just do splash damage to them alongside her secondary fire. In more scenarios, I wouldn't really recommend using her pulse cannon to, let's just say, do a 1v1 against someone. If you're up against a saber wielder and that saber wielder is exactly facing you, they are dead on facing you, I would not recommend in any scenario to use a pulse cannon. I just don't really see any use for that, because that just means that you're just stuck in the animation of loading up your pulse cannon. It's not going to do significant damage to actually defeat your opponent, because you have to charge the pulse cannon and you have to actually land those headshots or maybe your body shot so that you can do significant damage to your opponent. So whenever you're playing as Iden, like I mentioned, her being a blaster character, and especially when you're going up against saber wielders, you're going to be targeted a lot. More players, especially veteran players, they know Iden is a big threat, and Iden is one of those characters where if she is defended properly by her teammates, she can be absolutely annoying to deal with, because you have your teammates defending you. You can then stun them at any given chance whenever your shock droid is up, and then you can then just carry on with using her secondary fire. And like I said, for her secondary fire is actually really helpful in actually taking down saber wielders. Like I mentioned, it's actually really good, especially when you're playing heroes versus villains. As an example, you're going up against a saber wielder. It's good to use your normal TL50 blaster, just do a couple hits at them, and then let's just say that your opponent is rushing you now, then I'd recommend maybe doing a roll so that you can get maybe behind them or maybe to the side of them, then use the secondary fire. And because you're going up against a saber wielder, especially if they're grounded, I would highly recommend using the secondary fire on the floor, because it does splash damage, and in more scenarios you'll actually be able to do damage to your opponent. This is actually really helpful in making sure that you can actually keep a fair distance away from your opponent while still doing damage to them. They're blocking, that's perfectly fine. Just keep shooting them after a while and then whip out the secondary fire, and if your stun is back up, then you can actually use the stun and actually finish them up afterwards. So there we go. So that is the hero guide for Iden. I hope that you guys have actually enjoyed this. I try to talk about some of her star cards, try to talk about her strengths and weaknesses, while also showcasing some gameplay as well to actually showcase exactly what I'm trying to speak about. Like I mentioned, Iden, she's one of those characters who is very annoying to go up against, and she is very fun as well, especially when you're on a really good kill streak with her. And one thing I also try to mention as well, I know obviously a lot of veteran players are going to obviously have their loadout for Iden, and they're already going to know about the secondary fire and the stun droid and everything like that. This guide is more for just for newer players, or even players who are actually struggling to actually find star cards that suit a playstyle to actually keep them alive in regards to playing as Iden. So hopefully this has actually helped you guys. I really hope that it does. And thank you so much for watching. It is much appreciated, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.